Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about why mule deer bucks love benches. And this is one of the most misunderstood terrain features in mule deer hunting. A lot of deer hunters hear the word bench and immediately think every flat spot on the mountain is going to hold a giant buck. And that's obviously not how this works. A bench only matters when it solves problems for deer: security, wind, visibility, shade, escape routes, energy conservation, access to feed, efficient travel. Mature bucks are constantly trying to stack advantages, and benches often allow them to combine multiple survival advantages into one small piece of terrain. And that's why some benches consistently hold mature bucks while others never do. And once you understand how bucks actually use benches, you're going to stop randomly glassing country and start narrowing down where a mature deer truly wants to live. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent mule deer hunter. This episode isn't just about finding benches either. It's about understanding why flat ground in the right location becomes a security system for old bucks. A bench is simply a shelf in the mountain where steep terrain levels out, right, for a stretch before getting steep again. Sometimes they're obvious, big wide shelves halfway down a basin, but a lot of times the best mule deer benches are more subtle, small little contour breaks hidden inside larger terrain. And that's why so many deer hunters can walk right past them. A mature buck doesn't need a football field sized flat. Sometimes he only needs a patch of terrain big enough to bed comfortably in while maintaining visibility and escape options. They can be really small. Benches become important because they interrupt movement. Animals traveling steep country naturally gravitate towards terrain that conserves their energy. So predators and hunters do the same thing. Benches become natural travel lines, staging areas, and bedding zones. And when you start e-scouting mule deer country, you're going to notice something really important. The best benches usually aren't isolated. They're connected to multiple terrain features all at once, like timber edges or brush pockets, escape chutes, feeding slopes, shade, water, maybe wind protection. The bench itself isn't the answer. The terrain surrounding the bench is what determines whether mature bucks are actually going to want to use it. Mature mule deer survive because they're obsessed with security. A buck wants to detect danger before danger detects him. Benches help him do that. A buck bedded on a bench can often see downhill while using cover behind him to break up his outline. That's a huge advantage in mountain country. A lot of times the steep terrain below the bench becomes the buck's early warning system. Movement stands out. Sound travels uphill. Thermals often rise during daylight hours. The buck gains information without exposing himself. And if danger appears above him, he usually has multiple escape options. That's the key. Mature bucks rarely bed where they only have one exit. Good benches often connect to secondary benches, cuts, timber pockets, avalanche chutes, or just steep escape terrain. The older the buck gets, the more his bedding choices revolve around the controlled escape. Not just comfort, not scenery, obviously, but survival. And that's why random open benches usually disappoint hunters. If a buck doesn't feel secure there, he's not going to stay there in daylight no matter how good it looks from a distance. One thing a lot of deer hunters underestimate is how much mule deer care about efficiency. Everything in a mature buck's life really revolves around managing risk while conserving energy. Steep country burns calories fast, especially during heat, snow, rut recovery, or pressure. Benches reduce that cost. So instead of climbing straight up or dropping straight down every time they move, bucks can side hill across benches while expending less energy. And that matters more than a lot of hunters realize. A mature buck might feed in one zone, bed on another bench, then escape through a third terrain layer. Benches become connectors between all those systems. And older bucks especially prefer predictable movement routes that require them less unnecessary exposure and effort. And that's why you're going to often find worn game trails cutting across benches instead of just straight up mountainsides. Deer naturally choose efficient movement. This becomes huge during early season heat and late season snow. When temperatures are high, bucks want to minimize unnecessary movement. When snow gets deep, every extra vertical foot but costs energy they might not be able to replace nutritionally. The mountain is constantly applying pressure to survival, and benches reduce that pressure. Hey, if you're serious about becoming a more consistent mule deer hunter, I built the Mule Deer Hunting series of ebooks to walk you through my entire process step by step. This is a 7-volume system designed specifically for Western hunters pursuing mule deer in real mountain and public land environments. In Volume 1, Foundations and Reality, you're going to learn how to understand how mule deer actually live, the myths that mislead most hunters, and the mindset required for consistent success. In Volume 2, Finding Mule Deer and Understanding Pressure, you're going to learn how mule deer move across the landscape and how hunting pressure changes their behavior. In Volume 3, Terrain, Aspect, and Positioning, you're going to learn how to read mule deer country and position yourself correctly using terrain and wind. In Volume 4, Glassing, Visual Discipline, and Buck Identification, you're going to learn how to find mule deer, glass efficiently, and identify mature bucks. In Volume 5, Early Season and High Country Strategy, you're going to learn how to hunt velvet and early season bucks in alpine terrain. In Volume 6, Rut, Transition, and Late Season Movement, we're going to talk about understanding migration, cold weather movement, and how bucks shift through the season. And in Volume 7, Execution and Decision Stacking, we're going to talk about how to close the distance, execute under pressure, and make disciplined decisions during the stalk. If you want to hunt mule deer with structure instead of guesswork, you can buy them individually, or you can bundle all the volumes together and save 50% off the entire mule deer hunting series of ebooks at backboneunlimited.com. This is where benches become deadly important for mature mule deer. A mature buck wants two things at all times. He wants to be able to see danger if he can, and he wants the wind helping him detect what he can't see. Benches often allow him to combine both. One of the best examples is a bench just below a ridgeline. A buck can bed where he sees downhill while wind or thermals carry scent from above or behind him. That means his eyes cover one side while his nose covers the other. That's elite survival mule deer positioning. And when hunters approach benches without understanding wind flow, they're going to get busted long before they ever see the deer. What makes this even harder is that benches create inconsistent airflow. Thermals swirl, side winds bounce off terrain, midday heat changes everything. Timber pockets create dead air. That's why mature bucks often choose benches with broken terrain instead of clean open hillsides. Broken terrain gives them more wind information, more scent control, more escape options. The best bucks rarely bed where wind is simple either. They bed where wind is confusing for predators, but understandable for them. A mature buck's bedding area usually isn't random either. He's looking for thermal regulation, concealment, visibility, and wind advantage all at once. And benches often create that combination pretty naturally, especially benches with brush pockets or scattered timber, maybe rock outcroppings, mahogany or oak brush, sagey fingers, or uneven terrain. Those little features matter because they break up the buck's outline. A mature mule deer buck doesn't need complete cover. He just needs enough terrain distortion to disappear. That's why a lot of deer hunters constantly glass over bedded bucks. The bench might look open until the deer stands up. Shade also becomes huge. South-facing benches might hold deer early or late in the day, while the north-facing benches with cooler shade often become preferred bedding during that warm weather. And during midday, bucks often shift only short distances within the same bench system to maintain thermal comfort while staying close to escape terrain. This is why mature bucks can feel impossible to locate. They're not always moving far. Sometimes they're simply repositioning within tiny terrain features that a lot of deer hunters never study carefully enough. A bench by itself really means nothing. The real question is, why would a mature buck spend daylight there? Usually the answer connects back to food and security all working together. The best mule deer benches are often close enough to quality feed that a buck can transition efficiently without exposing himself for long periods. That might mean high country forbs in early season or south-facing winter browse, agricultural transition areas, sometimes burn edges, sometimes oak brush, sometimes just mountain shrub communities. Whatever the food source is, mature bucks prefer efficient access between feeding and bedding. And that's why benches above feeding basins can be really productive. A buck can feed low during low light, then rise back into the bench system before daylight fully exposes himself. And many mature bucks stop short of the obvious feeding areas hunters like to glass the hardest. They're going to stage on secondary benches first, right? Watching, listening, waiting. That's one reason a lot of deer hunters often see younger bucks in the open while those mature deer remain hidden nearby. Older bucks don't like exposing themselves any longer than necessary, and benches help them shorten their exposure time. And this is where a lot of hunters make big mistakes. They find one bench on OnX and assume it's automatically going to be good mule deer habitat, and it might be, but mature bucks usually prefer benches with multiple advantages all stacked together. That might be leadward benches that can offer wind stability, or brushy benches that provide concealment, or benches that are below ridges that give them escape access, or shaded benches that reduce heat and stress, or cliffback benches that limit predator approach from different angles that he can't see or smell from. Benches above feeding zones improve transition efficiency, and often the very best benches aren't very large at all. They're irregular, they're broken, they're hard to glass, or even harder to access, and that's important. If a bench is easy for hunters to reach, easy to see, and easy to walk through, then mature bucks are often going to abandon it during daylight. And pressure, it changes everything. Some benches only hold mature bucks during low pressure periods. Others consistently hold deer because terrain naturally protects them from human movement. The best mule deer terrain almost always has some form of natural defense built into it. That might be distance, steepness of the slope, visibility restriction, wind complexity, or just difficult access. Benches also change throughout the year because mule deer priorities change. Early season bucks often prioritize shade and cooler thermals, nearby feed, and minimal movement. That's why high country benches near alpine feed can become extremely productive during warm weather. During the rut, benches often become travel corridors. Bucks cruise them while checking doe groups, scent checking lower terrain, and conserving energy between movement cycles. Late season, that changes everything again. Now, survival becomes the priority. South-facing benches with reduced snow depth, better solar exposure, and nearby browse often become the key wintering areas. And mature bucks become even more focused on calorie conservation. That's really important to note because deer hunters sometimes hunt benches the same way year-round, but deer behavior changes dramatically with weather, pressure, food availability, and biological stress. A bench holding bucks in September might be completely dead in November. Meanwhile, a bench that looks worthless during summer scouting might be loaded during migration or winter concentration periods. The terrain doesn't stay static, is what I'm trying to say, and neither do mule deer. Now, when I'm e-scouting mule deer country, I'm not just looking for flat terrain either, right? I'm looking for benches that are connected to the survival advantages we talked about earlier. So on topo maps, benches usually appear where contour lines spread apart temporarily before tightening back up again. But the important part is what surrounds them. I want nearby feed. I want escape terrain. I want shade. I want broken cover. I want low hunting pressure. I want access to water. And I want multiple approach routes for the deer. One thing I really like are benches connected vertically. A buck might use different layers of the same mountain depending on weather pressure or thermals. And another important detail is access. Can hunters easily walk into the bench from a trail? Can side-by-sides reach it? Can it be glassed from a distance? Pressure really changes the bench quality fast. A mediocre bench in low-pressure country often outperforms a perfect-looking bench crawling with hunting pressure, right? And once you start finding mature bucks consistently, you're going to notice patterns that indicate that, not just in the bench itself, but in the terrain systems surrounding it. A lot of deer hunters glass benches way too fast also. They scan the open part of the bench and don't immediately see deer, then they move on. And I think that's a huge mistake. So take note here. Mature mule deer survive because they use tiny terrain distortions incredibly well. When I glass benches, I'm looking for horizontal lines, ear flicks, antler tips, shadows that just don't match, body curves, and pieces of deer instead of whole deer. The back edge of the bench is often critical, right? The furthest part of the bench away from you. So are brush pockets, scattered rocks, isolated trees, and terrain folds. And patience matters here. You hear me talk about that an awful lot in any glassing video. A mature buck might only expose part of his face or antlers for seconds at a time. So lighting also changes everything. A bench that looks empty at 9 a.m. might suddenly reveal deer once shadows shift in the evening. And don't ignore the terrain above the bench. A lot of bucks bed slightly higher than a lot of deer hunters expect so that they can monitor movement below. Benches aren't just spots to glass, they're terrain systems that you slowly have to pick apart and dissect. One of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of deer hunters make is walking directly onto benches before properly observing them as well. That's like walking straight into a bedroom. If a mature buck is there, you're probably done before you even know he existed. A lot of experienced mule deer hunters I know spend more time glassing into benches than physically walking through them, especially during daylight, because mature bucks often use benches specifically because they can detect movement approaching from below or across the slope. Another mistake is ignoring wind because the terrain just looks good and you think you have it figured out before you get there. But good looking terrain means nothing if your scent blows through the bedding area. And another major issue is overcommitting to one bench. Hunters often become so emotionally attached to terrain features instead of reading real time conditions. Pressure changes deer behavior, wind changes bedding, heat changes exposure, snow changes movement. Benches are just tools within the larger system, not guaranteed buck locations. The goal isn't to force deer to fit your plan about benches. The goal is to understand why a mature buck would choose that terrain feature today. Mule deer bucks don't love benches just because benches are flat either. They love them because benches solve survival problems, and usually several survival problems at the same time: security, wind, shade, efficiency, visibility, escape, and food access. A mature buck is constantly trying to stack advantages while reducing his risk, and benches often allow him to combine all those multiple advantages into one small piece of terrain. That's why benches become so important in mule deer country. But the real key is understanding that not all benches are created equal. The terrain surrounding the bench, it matters just as much as the bench itself. And once you start looking at benches through these eyes of survival instead of scenery, your ability to locate mature bucks dramatically changes. You're going to stop randomly covering country. You're going to stop glassing everything equally, and you're going to start narrowing down where an old buck can truly survive daylight consistently. Because in mule deer hunting, the best terrain usually isn't the terrain that looks all that impressive. It's the terrain that makes mature bucks feel safe enough to stay there after the sun comes up. Now, if you want to go deeper into mule deer movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the Mule Deer Hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how mule deer actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of mule deer resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. I hope to see you in the comments. I read them all. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.